All right. Good morning, Doug. We have two, I think, very important things to talk about. We'll start off with discussing some of the latest actions of the state, but then we're going to get to a book that we talked about last week. We kind of teased that we would discuss a book called The Great Taking. But first of all, you're a new subscriber to the Washington Post, and apparently today you saw an article about some of the latest sentencing.
Yes, and let me explain that I only subscribed to the Post because they were offering a super duper first year only deal. Um, and I felt it was an obligation while we're doing these podcasts to keep an eye on what the establishment is doing. I really just didn't have the heart to do the same thing with the New York Times. I thought the Washington Post, ensconced as it is in the very heart of the beast, would be good. And yeah, so I'm doing that. And let me further explain. I haven't gone soft, taking advantage of the Post's super duper low first year rate. I have ulterior motives for that. And I've also got to point out, in case any of you noticed, that I'm wearing a unicorn T-shirt. This T-shirt was hand painted uh, before the time that unicorns were a public policy statement. And I will draw to your attention the fact that there are no rainbows in this T-shirt, although there would be if they were was created today.
Is
So just wanted to clear that stuff out of the way.
All right. So some of the issues we see the state starting to really aggressively crack down on enemies, and in particular, there's some recent sentencing of Proud Boys or Oath Keepers that were associated with the January 6th
Mhm.
insurrection.
Yeah, and talking about Proud Boys or Oath Keepers, they both seem to me, from what I've read about them, never met an Oath Keeper or a Proud Boy personally, but what I've read them to have said, they seem like perfectly decent people that are concerned about maintaining the traditions and ethics of America. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these people at all. It was a tactical error to show up January 6th and be part of the crowd. And of course, my feeling about January 6th is it wasn't a fomented revolution. It was a disturbance where a bunch of people walked to the Capitol, as they had every right to do, and there were some bad actors in the group, probably FBI agents like that guy Ray Epps, who was all over the place, having actually encouraged people to be naughty. Uh, some damage was done, but nothing major, and nobody was endangered, and no cops were. Maybe one cop got pepper sprayed or something like that, and one had a heart attack or something the next day. But this has been blown totally out of proportion, and the sentences these guys were given, 17 years, 18 years, something on that order.
Yeah, there's two. I think this article that you're referencing talks about two specific individuals, and one of them was sentenced to 17 years. This is a guy named Biggs. He was sentenced to 17 years, and another one from Philadelphia was sentenced to 15 years. And I think the charges were seditious conspiracy, is what they actually charged them with originally.
Well, you cannot commit a crime or imagined crime, which is what it is, against the state without expecting to be punished rather. I mean, if you committed a murder, you might be out in a couple of years or a few years. But and where do they get the jury to convict these guys? I mean, was it were they railroaded to a jury that was full of Trump haters and
Well,
you
it
know
was a DC jury, I believe, right?
Okay, so it was a bunch of, I presume, either black people or government employees in DC, and they would have been selected to be fearful uh, of these guys and what they represent, and to hate them. I mean, there was no way they wouldn't be convicted with a DC jury because everybody in DC is a government employee or associates or lives with government employees on a secondary or tertiary level. So I feel bad for those guys. That's a long time to be in jail for taking part in a, I would say, peaceful march
Mm.
that got out of control.
Well, and obviously there's these people on the ground, the January 6th protesters in particular, who have been charged with all kinds of crimes. And then, the most extreme, which I think the leader of the Proud Boys, it's the chairman, Enrique Tarrio. Uh, you know, I think they're trying to get 33 years for him.
Yes, and one of the leaders is a black guy too.
That's
So
him. Yeah,
that's
that's him.
him. So I guess they're really making an example of him, which is really shameful. I mean, the whole thing is criminal. These people and what the government uh, people say and the way they describe these people, it's shameful and it's criminal and it's indicative of what's going on here in the country, which is well, and of course the thousand other people, about 1,000, have apparently been jailed and are being prosecuted, and some of them have been held in jail without a prompt trial for a couple of years already. So this is we really do have Jacobins running this country, and I think it's going to get worse. And the other thing that you mentioned that we were going to talk about was Trump and the fact that there are all these indictments against him.
Yeah, four separate jurisdictions now. I think New York, DC, Florida, and Georgia is the most recent one. Something like 92 or 96 charges against him.
Yeah, and of course, it's long been acknowledged that you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And that's what's going on here. Because these prosecutors have a visceral hatred for Trump, and they've made up charges. Even Alan Dershowitz looked at all these charges in all these jurisdictions, and he just basically describes them as fabrications, as basically bullshit, as a political stunt. But the thing is, I think they're going to work. And the reason I think they're going to work is that when you have that many charges against you in four separate jurisdictions, legal fees alone are going to run into the millions, and the time that it's going to take for him to defend against those things when he's running for president are going to make it very hard for him to run for president, which is, of course, why they're doing this.
Right. Yeah, they have
And
one of the trials is set to start. The Monday before Super Tuesday, the big primary day.
and we can rest assured that in all of these jurisdictions, the juries will be packed with Trump haters. I mean, when a jury is selected, I'm not an expert on this, but the defense and the prosecution go through a process of voir dire so you can reject a certain number of jurors. It's a finite number. And these are jurisdictions where after the defense rejects the most egregious of possible jurors, well, they're all going to be Trump haters and they'll probably convict him just because these people really hate Trump. So if he's convicted in any or all of these jurisdictions, I mean, yeah, you can appeal, I guess, and so forth. But this is almost, well, it is fixing the election because it's why they've done it. And I understand that Tucker. I haven't listened to his Tucker's presentation on this, but Tucker Carlson has, connecting the dots, said that, first he, they disparage him and then they indict him, and it's a progression. And if he's still running and it looks good, well, Trump has an unfortunate accident, or maybe they do to him what they did to Kennedy, because these people are capable of anything. And they'll probably get away with anything after they do it, since the FBI is fully controlled and the CIA and all these other agencies are fully controlled. So we're well into third world territory. All we need is a financial collapse to happen at the same time.
which it may. It certainly could.
And then, because the Republicans may not have a candidate at that time because of all this nonsense, and they're not going to be running Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Will they run Newsom? Uh, well, they're capable of anything. Uh, but maybe they'll say because of force majeure, and maybe it'll be an actual hot war with Russia, or full scale financial collapse, or something that we're not even thinking about, which would be a black swan because we're thinking about it. They say, look, we've got to put off the election for a while. And maybe that's the key to put a general in there, because everybody can agree that the military is the most trusted institution in the US. So they might drag out somebody like, eh, there's like, it's like 47. I think that's the number, four-star generals in the military, which is an amazing number because World War II was fought with only seven four-star generals. So I think they'll pull a general, a left-wing general. They're everywhere, and it's kind of game over.
Hmm. Well, you're not the only person to say that there's a high risk of there not being a 2024 election. I've heard Colonel Douglas McGregor, a military man himself, say the same thing. Say that he's concerned about that it may never come. The next election may never actually be here.
Yeah, I listen to his broadcasts sometimes, and it is interesting that kind of like McGregor, everything he says seems very reasonable and well thought out, not only on the war in the Ukraine, which I think he correctly figures that the Russians are winning. I mean, I subscribe to a number of other blogs, and I'm on a Zoomcast with some other military guys, and they all agree that the Russians are winning big time, which is completely counter to what you read in the mass media. But interesting thing about McGregor is he's making lots of comments about the economy and the political situation and things that are not in the military spectrum.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, the last year it seemed to me like he's running for office. I mean, he's not selling a book, but he's doing lots of media appearances. I mean, lots of them everywhere. And so he's not selling a book, and he broadened his scope of conversation well beyond Russia, Ukraine to talking about domestic issues, the economy, the debt, the violence and crime in cities in the US. I mean, he's the fentanyl coming over the borders being open effectively. So he's commenting on a lot of presidential type issues.
Yeah. So who will Trump, presuming Trump is still going to run with all the things the Democrats are throwing up at him, uh, who would be his vice presidential candidate? Maybe it's going to be Douglas McGregor, or maybe it'll be Vivek Ramaswamy.
Hmm. Perhaps, yeah. I mean, if I were Trump, I'd probably go with McGregor over Vivek personally. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly high in the polls at least. I mean, he's probably the highest in the other than polls other than Trump, obviously, but not even in the neighborhood of where Trump is. So I don't know. I mean, but just think about through the legal situation he has. You know, I know that there are federal charges, which if he's president, he could pardon himself of, right?
Mhm.
And get out of those. But there are some state charges, I think, as well in Georgia. So he can't pardon his way out of those. But then imagine if he's not president and he actually is convicted and is supposed to go to prison. His Secret Service detail goes with him to prison. So how does that work exactly?
Right.
You know?
Right. No, it becomes quite a puzzle, quite a conundrum. Yeah.
Yes.
This is a real mess. And meanwhile, the US is collapsing financially, uh, with a
Culturally,
$2 trillion deficit
socially.
this year. Yeah. And and interest rates are going up, which has all kinds of consequences. So we're in for what's technically known as a shitstorm.
It's the technical definition. Shitstorm. Yeah. Well, and that kind of takes us to the next topic, which is this book that was shared with us by a mutual friend, Chris McIntosh. He has a newsletter called Capitalist Exploits,
Yep,
which is fantastic. I highly would recommend that.
it
Chris is
is.
a thinker, um, and so he sent us this book, which is available for free, and I'll share the link in the description of this video. It's at thegreattaking.com, and it's written by a fund manager who I think doesn't have anything to gain by getting this information out there. So I think that in itself is interesting.
That's right. In fact, he's got nothing to gain and a lot to lose, I would say, actually.
Quite a bit. And he actually references some encounters he's had with intelligence people in the past that subtly discouraged him from talking about this stuff. Asking him, for instance, if his family knew he was talking about this. So that's kind of a hint. It, but this book does what this book. How should we describe it, Doug? Why don't you try describing what it's all about fundamentally?
Well, I'll tell you what my takeaway on it is, and I think everybody that's listening to this now can get a free copy of this book, which he's making available for free. And it's not a long book, 150 pages, I think.
130. Yep.
Oh, okay. So the first part of the book, half of the book, whatever it is, he goes through the history of uh, stocks. Well, it starts with the currency, where it used to be the currency was gold you could hold in your hand, and then it became a Federal Reserve note redeemable in gold, and then it wasn't, but you still had the paper, and now you're just going to have a digital asset of some type. It's completely under the control of the powers that be. But at least we've got the stock market and the bond market. Those are real things. Well, one thing that I've noted personally over the years is you used to get stock certificates. You owned 100 shares of something, the stock certificate would come in the mail and you could put it in your safe deposit box. But I don't know when they stopped that. I think he probably gives the dates for all that because it's very well footnoted and all that, but I can't remember. Okay, stock certificates really don't exist anymore. They're just notations, and they're generally held with brokers, and so you don't really own it. In fact, your assets with the broker are, I think this is what he's saying, and you may correct me because you may recall this better. It's just like your money in a bank is not your money. You're just another unsecured creditor of the bank if it goes bust. Well, it's basically the same thing at a brokerage firm.
Right.
Yes, you have civic insurance and all that, just like you have FDIC, but those are both basically sticker principles. You put a sticker on the door and, oh, nothing to worry about. There's a sticker on the door saying, you know,
Right.
help me out too.
Yeah. I mean, the FDIC can only cover 2% of all insured deposits. So, even if you have that guarantee from the FDIC, they can only cover 2% of it. So, two
Unless
cents
you're
for
well,
insured deposits.
unless you're a well-connected Silicon Valley guy, like recently happened where they bailed all these guys out for many millions in those banks.
Exactly.
They do that for all the little guys. If a bunch of little non-systemic risk banks fail, I kind of doubt it. Who knows? I mean, they're printing up money like, you know, anything could happen. But basically, what the point he's making here is that you really don't own your stock certificates anymore. And This this kind of ties in to what the Schwabenklaus at the World Economic Forum has been saying in the open and advertising it. You'll own nothing and be happy. I thought it was a joke to start with, but
Yeah, I
it's
thought so
not a
too.
joke.
And this, what this guy does in this book, in The Great Taking, is he goes in great detail with very well researched and footnoted uh, evidence that there's been a multiple decade long effort to make it so you did not actually have a legal claim on the securities that you own, that you don't even, I mean, that essentially there, and basically it describes a mechanism by which you really could, Klaus's vision of the future could actually come true very, very quickly, where all of the financial assets, the securities you think you have, could disappear overnight. And it starts with, it's like back in the 60s, he calls it the dematerialization. It's essentially, instead of having the paper certificates, you go to more of a, what do you call it, like a kind of an order book, just a ledger system, I guess. And then he gets into a change that you have a security entitlement instead of ownership. Instead of you owning the shares, you have an entitlement to those shares, but it's conditional depending upon a number of different mechanisms. Then there's a harmonization effort. So there's a like a body of law that was really ideal for taking these assets from you in the US. And so then they harmonize that, another term the globalists like to use, um, across the EU. And so there were some countries in Europe that were holdouts and took a lot longer, like Sweden, for instance. But ultimately, they got on board with this new approach as well. And then they set up a mechanism where, really your shares are actually held at these custodians, not even really the brokers. It's custodians who actually, the clearinghouses, who essentially facilitate, and they're not regulated, and there's not even like a there's not clarity at all about what even happens within those. And apparently they're pretty under collateralized. But all of the securities that you now only have an entitlement claim on rather than ownership are actually used as pooled collateral for other people's investments, specifically a lot of these derivatives. Um, Anyway, he goes through all that and kind of explains in his mind that this is set up this way specifically intentionally so that there can be a giant rug pull on these securities. And he goes into a process of explaining some of the things that happened during the Great Depression that I was unaware of, which then encouraged me to go read another book that was recommended by another friend of ours in that Zoom group, um, which I read, and I learned all kinds of stuff about the Great Depression that I was unaware of. And specifically in the Great Taking, he talks about the bank holiday. So FDR comes in, of course, he has a claim on all the gold, so you have to turn it in, surrender it to the government for $20.62 or whatever it was. And he also they close the banks on a bank holiday. Now, when they reopen, only Fed approved banks reopen. So there's a whole bunch of banks that go bust, and all the depositors who were in those busted banks lost all their assets. They were just out. But the reopened banks were backstopped by the Fed, and they stopped failing. Okay, but then what happened was, if you had debt with some of these banks, if you had a note on your home or something like that with some of these banks that went bust, all of those, now you lost your deposits, but all of that debt got rolled up into these Fed approved banks, like the banks that still stuck around. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that FDR did, he was claimed to be a man of the people with the New Deal and all this nonsense. But in this book and the other one that I read, it's amazing what FDR did beyond that, beyond the bank holiday, beyond the gold seizure and the devaluation that he did to really grind Americans into dust throughout the 30s. Every year the changes of policies just made life more and more miserable for everyone. I can get into some of that in a little bit, but his contention in this book is that they did it once in the Great Depression. He also makes a case that that it's this sort of financial engineering caused crisis of 2007, the financial crisis, and also in the dot-com one, were basically opportunities for, these this moneyed class essentially to harvest the goods of the people, during these periods. So, and he claims that that's what they did it before. It was done intentionally. It's set up again to do it intentionally now, and that he anticipates there will be a major rug pull again.
Yep. And reading the book, it seemed very reasonable to me. He lays out an excellent case, which I think you've described very well. And it seems incredible to us as Americans, but you look at this from a more historical perspective, and it seems that throughout recorded history, the guys on top like to turn the guys on the bottom into serfs for all kinds of reasons, not least of which are psychological, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
oh,
the
okay.
the only problem with the book, I thought, and everybody should read it since it's free and it's short and it's well done, is he doesn't go into projecting exactly how this is going to play out, nor does he say what you can do to defend yourself against it. He's just telling us this is happening.
Yeah, he says that the trap is set essentially, and that they've done it before. They've executed on this before. Uses the Great Depression as an example, but he doesn't specifically articulate how it might occur. And he definitely does. It leaves you totally in almost a depressed state. I think after reading it, most people who I know who I've shared this with who have not read it come back and go, I almost wish I hadn't because I don't know what I would do. I don't know what to do about it now.
That's right. At least give me a straw to grab onto.
Right.
Um, I thought about this, and maybe owning real estate is the one thing, since the titles are local, um, and it's tangible. You can't have a digital entry
Right.
for the actual real estate. That's maybe something.
Yeah, real assets owned free and clear, I think are, especially are the big advantages. I mean, you could be in a position where the bank, I mean, one of the things they did during the Great Depression, for instance, that I didn't understand is that, they changed substantially twice the reserve ratio banks had the Fed demanded higher reserve ratios from the banks. So the banks had to call in loans. So imagine you lost your deposits in one of these banks that failed, but your mortgage and your home still remain, but with a new bank. And then the reserve ratios are increased for that bank. So they have to call in loans essentially to generate cash. And you don't have it. So while you might have had enough to continue to make payments, or you had a job still, you lost your property. And the banks worked out deals for you to rent your property from them. They did that a lot. So they did that twice, and it dramatic. That's one of the things they did that dramatically increased the destruction of normal people during the Great Depression. And the other thing they did, and this to me was actually very shocking. I didn't understand this. Is that um, you know income tax rates, which just were introduced just what I guess 3 decades before that, or 2 decades before that, and were started off very small, got ratcheted up quite a bit, and they were increased every year of FDR's presidency except 1939, and they were they were a huge drag on the economy. So pulling this money out of the economy, and what FDR did with that money, of course, there were New Deal policies that happened, but a huge portion of the money that he pulled out of the economy directly, he used to buy more gold on the international market. And then let's say they sanitized that gold, meaning they made it so, under the gold standard, the way it would normally work is if you had more gold in the treasury, then you issue more notes. But you often hear of accounts of people during the Great Depression that there just wasn't any money, like no one had any money. And so like that just makes and so what FDR did is he sucked up the liquidity out of the economy by high confiscatory taxation, and then used it to buy gold on the international market and hoarded it in the reserves. And so that made things much, much worse. And that act alone was just, it seems so intentionally punitive of people and driving asset prices down. And then you have, the Astors and the Kennedys that come in and can buy up these assets for pennies on the dollar, because people need money so desperately badly.
Yes. And that, of course, leads to the other thing that you can do other than owning real estate. It's to own gold coins in your own possession. Once again, these are tangible things, not represented by digital entries. But I don't know what you can do besides uh, real property, real estate, and gold coins. That, if he's right, and it appears that he's right, as unbelievable as it seems, I don't know what else you can do. We're actually looking at an actual chaos type situation
Yeah.
that these people are fomenting. There's something else that relates to what you said about renting and buying up houses and renting. There's a phenomenon that's been going on in Kishi resort towns like Vail and Aspen, are, uh, two places that I know, uh, where what's happened is that uh, people are the reason why it's impossible for a working person to own his own house and you have to live in employee housing, basically, which is either rented or you buy on a subsidized basis, which is all screwed up in all kinds of different ways. It's that groups of speculators have been buying houses and renting them out as B&Bs. So instead of renting a house for $2,500 a month to a working class person who might have been there for many years, uh, you rent it out for $2,500 a week or more to people in the short-term B&B market. And this is an interesting phenomenon that's overtaken ski towns in particular, that's impoverishing the local residents to the benefit of the outsiders moving in.
Right. And I like how they do, then the city's solution to that is they come up with some subsidized housing blocks that they can rent out to the people who serve them, right?
That's right. That's right. No, it's no fun being turned into a serf right before your own very eyes. It's
Right.
it's shocking. The US is not the same country that it was even 20 years ago. Forget about 40 years ago. Absolutely forget about 60 years ago. It's, we've got nicer houses and bigger cars, but it's a very different place in every other way and changing rapidly.
Yeah, I'd say if anyone, I'd encourage everyone who has owned securities to definitely at least skim the Great Taking. It's absolutely worth it to understand the legal framework that has been set up and what the consequences of that are. Whether it's just that you could have a clearinghouse, one clearinghouse go under, and there are implications of that, or if your broker goes under, what are the implications of that? And we all know with banks, it's supposed to be basically after the financial crisis, it's supposed to be bail-ins. I mean, you're supposed to lose your capital beyond the insured limits through bail-ins now, right? That's the way the law is. So you got to know, you got to understand those risks. And then the second book that I read, and I know Doug you haven't, is The Fruits of Graft: Great Depressions Then and Now. And this seems like a great companion to it if you want to know more, understand what's been done more historically, because he makes the case that there's this, he calls them mercantilists, and that they like the two-tiered society. They don't like middle class. Middle class is bad. You have serfs, and the rich are the good, are good. That's the ideal. And when you look at like FDR's actions, it seems obvious that he was trying to grind down the middle class, most of all, because that's this guy argues, Wayne Jett in this book, that the greatest threat to these mercantilists, their interests is middle class, especially upper middle class. So they have to be targeted first and foremost. But he goes through it. He talks about the Great Depression, the issues with that, even the financial crisis. He says, it always gets blamed. I like my take on the Great Depression was, oh, the Roaring Twenties, people, the people got too speculative in stocks, and then that just there was a bubble. The bubble blew up, and then you know there was a Great Depression. Like that's what I'm basically that's my fundamental understanding of what happened. And I didn't understand that there were a lot of people who, of course, got out of the market at the right time, who made vast fortunes when the market was going down, and then were able to buy assets for pennies on the dollar. Kind of with inside knowledge about what was happening within the government.
Yeah, but it's a little bit different now today too, because with these giant trusts like State Street and Vanguard and BlackRock, it's true you can't vote your stocks anymore. I mean, so you've lost that, not just the physical possession of them, but you can't vote them. They voted for you. Basically, that's the way it works out. That's certainly true of all the pension funds and so forth. So it's hard to say how this is going to sort out, but there's going to be a great reset, which they've been talking about. And I think this is part of it. It's very disturbing.
What do you think in terms of timing with the economic reckoning that must come, the financial reckoning that must come? You know, the great taking seems like it's written with a sense of urgency that there's not much time left. I don't know what this is. It's hard. Predictions, of course, are always risky, but
Maybe, maybe it's all coming together around around the next election, which may or may not be held.
hmm,
And if the markets collapse at that time, then the government would have to step in. Something would have to be done to ameliorate things. And whatever they do, this could be part of it, quite frankly. It's a way to punish it'll be said that you're punishing the rich, but the rich will be just fine. It's the poor bourgeoisie who everybody's kids who have idiotically gone to college have been taught the bourgeoisie are evil and are the enemy of the working man. And now we could have a real conflagration. I'm sorry to be so gloomy, but people ought to read the book and see what they think about it.
yeah, and I'll have links to it in the description of the video. I'd encourage everyone to definitely read it. If you own securities, you owe it to yourself to take it to give a look at it, at least to understand what the real risks are. And then, if anyone has feedback on steps that might be done to kind of hedge against it, I'd like to hear them because the way it's argued is it's a global phenomenon. The harmonization of the securities markets globally is effectively complete in his mind. He doesn't specifically address China or some Asian markets in there. And I don't, but certainly the major European and North American markets, absolutely, he covers and says that they're all in the same boat. So anyway, I'd love to hear what people have to say about ways you might be able to hedge.
Yeah, read the book. Don't read it on a dark and stormy night. So I'd give you an ungrab.
It certainly is possible. Certainly is possible, or at least make you want to own more gold. Now, one of the things people say, because obviously during the Great Depression, they seized all the gold. And so I know people have a worry, well, if I have gold, then maybe they'll just take it from me. And I think that there's real differences between then and now as that would make it less likely that they would go through the effort to seize gold today. Don't you think?
Yeah, everybody owned gold back in those days. Just a certain class of people own gold today. That could go either way. Maybe gold is a little bit like guns in today's world. If they confiscate guns, I suspect that a lot of people are going to have a boating accident in a deep lake, and I'm sorry they all disappeared. Or
Exactly. Yeah, and I
may,
think that
it might be the same with gold. But will they try to confiscate gold from individual owners? Do you have a thought on that? I'm of
I,
two minds.
well, I think it's far less likely, but just because there's not much there. I mean, have 1 in 1,000 Americans ever held gold? I doubt it. You know,
Probably not, because you can recall those Mark Dice videos, which watchers should Google Mark Dice and gold or silver, and where he is standing in front of a coin store and says silver bar, candy bar, Hershey bar, or a 10-ounce silver bar, and they all take the Hershey bar instead of the silver bar. So, yeah,
Exactly.
you're probably right. Maybe it's 1 out of 1,000. Let's
Yeah.
see,
So
300 million, 1 out of 1,000 would be 300,000. That many gold buyers? Well, maybe there's a few more, but
yeah.
1 out of 500.
It's not, yeah, it's hard to imagine it's worth going after that group because the results are, you don't accumulate a lot of capital doing that. Now I can see them going into these huge gold ETFs like GLD or something, which already has kind of really sketchy terms about your claim on the gold in it anyway. And just saying, we're going to monetize this, we'll give you cash for today's value, but we're taking this because that's a giant hoard that is certainly substantive and it's all accumulated already. So I can see that maybe that.
Or we'll we'll give you dollars at the market price. Who can argue with that?
Exactly. Yep. That's what they said they did before, before they devalued.
Yeah, except now it's very easy for them to print up the dollars. It's 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 I wonder if there's any way out of all this. I mean, even if Trump is elected, uh, he's got no understanding of economics. He's basically a statist. He's just a traditionalist. And I'm afraid Trump is the best that we can do in this coming election, and he's not very good.
No. And in this second book, The Fruits of Graft, the argument that they make is that it's, that the collapses, the financial crises that we've had before have been orchestrated, like intentional, knowing the timing. The fact that you can still do naked shorts, for instance, that it was actually outlawed in 1935, but made legal again in 2006, I think tells you a lot about the financial system. Basically people can borrow shares and sell short, but they never actually have to own, or get control of those shares. So that, they call it failure to deliver and the shares. And that's done. And so effectively they can print your stock and sell it short. And that's what they did financial institution after financial institution during the financial crisis. So the fact that they can do that, shows, I think that, and that the fact that is totally legal at this point, then, it could have an organized attack on the financial system at any time. So I think it would be coordinated and out of Trump's control.
That's right. And the way things are, it's much harder to mount an attack against short sellers because it used to be you could demand your stock certificate, which means they couldn't borrow the stock certificate. But that's been obviated to good measure. So
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a way out of it. I think the best you can probably do is just to make sure, in case some of these things happen, that you've hedged in some way. Maybe obviously having some cash on hand is smart in case there's even a temporary interruption in your ability to get cash from a bank, or what could end up being permanent. And also making sure that you have hard assets that you own, that non-financialized assets that you don't have debt on, especially.
gold, silver, some real estate, and very important, assets in a different country than your home country. That's, I think, going to be increasingly important.
I think so too. Okay, so if you guys have feedback on this, thoughts, ideas about what might do, or just, after you take a chance to read the book, let us know if you have any. If his case was as credible to you as it is to us. So we'd like to definitely get some feedback on that. And then I guess we'll be back next week, Doug, with more.
With any luck, we'll be back next week. Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.